Hello everyone, I am Saurabh and I welcome you back to the digital board series by Orchids Biosciences. This is the fourth video of the first chapter, that is life processes. In the first three videos, we have discussed the first two life processes. They are nutrition and respiration. This fourth video deals with the third life process in the chapter, that is transportation. In this video, we will be learning about the following topics. We will start with the blood and its constituents. Then we will see the pumping organ of our body, the structure of human heart. Then we will learn about the double circulation of human beings and how the blood is circulated throughout the body. Then we will learn about the blood vessels and what are its components. And finally, we will be learning about another fluid in our body, that is lymph. So let's start with transportation. As discussed in the previous videos, we know that to transport various substances in our body, blood is a medium that is used. Blood transports oxygen, nutrients, and even waste materials like carbon dioxide. So blood is a medium through which all these important substances are transported or circulated in our body. Now let us see what is blood made up of. Blood is made up of a fluid medium, that is plasma, cells which include the red blood cells, the white blood cells, and some tiny cells called as platelets. Let us see what are each of them and what are their functions. Plasma, the fluid of the blood, is responsible for transporting the nutrients and various waste materials like carbon dioxide and some nitrogenous waste. Coming to RBC, or the red blood cells, they are red in color due to a pigment called as hemoglobin. This hemoglobin pigment is responsible for binding with oxygen because it has a very high affinity towards oxygen and transporting the oxygen through the blood. So RBC is red in color due to the hemoglobin pigment, and hemoglobin also binds with oxygen and is transported through blood with the RBC. The next constituent of blood is WBC, or white blood cells. These white blood cells are responsible for providing immunity to our body. Now, what if the blood vessels, the tubes in which blood is flowing, develops a leak? So it has to be stopped. So to stop the leakage of blood, here comes the next constituent of the blood, that is platelets. These platelets will be responsible for the blood clotting. So whenever there is a leak in our blood vessels, these platelets will go and clot the blood, so there is no more leakage of blood. To pump this blood throughout the body, we need a pumping organ in our body, and that is heart. Along with the pumping organ, we also require some vessels or tubes through which the blood will be passed, and these are the blood vessels. The blood vessels which bring the blood to the heart are called as veins, and the blood vessels which carry the blood away from the heart are called as arteries. Let us now discuss about the pumping organ of our body, that is heart. The size of our heart is similar to the size of our fist, and it is located in the chest cavity or the thoracic cavity. If we see where exactly the heart is located, it is present in between our lungs and above the diaphragm. Our heart pumps both blood which carries higher concentration of oxygen, called as oxygenated blood, and also the blood which carries higher concentration of carbon dioxide, called as deoxygenated blood. So the oxygenated blood should not be mixed with deoxygenated blood, and therefore there is a separation in between our heart, and this is called as septum. This septum separates the oxygenated part of our blood in the heart with the deoxygenated blood. Now let us discuss the structure of human heart in detail. Our human heart is four-chambered to avoid any kind of mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. But it is not the same in case of all the organisms. Like in case of amphibians and reptiles, they can tolerate some amount of mixing and hence their heart is three-chambered. While in case of fishes, they are two-chambered. Coming to the structure of human heart, that is four-chambered. The upper half of the heart is called as the atrium and the lower half called the ventricles. There is always a confusion between which is the right part of the heart and left part of the heart. So to avoid this confusion, let us put this heart into a human being and see it from that person's perspective. If we look into this heart and try to label it, we will say this part is right and this part is left. But when we put this heart into this human being and see, for this person, this will be left and this will be right. So every time we label the heart, we should label it as if this heart is in some person and then try to label the parts. So this will become left and this part will become right. So you have to label always opposite to what we see. So this becomes the right part of the heart and this becomes the left part of the heart. The upper part is called atrium. So this one will be right atrium and this one will be right ventricle. On the other side, this one will be left atrium and this one will be left ventricle. To separate the right part of the heart with the left part of the heart, there is a septum which is present in between. Now let us see how the blood flows in our heart. We know that the blood vessels which bring blood to the heart are called as veins, and the blood vessels which carry the blood from the heart are called as arteries. If we see the human heart, the veins will combine or they will fuse to form a large vein, which is the largest vein of our body, called as the vena cava. This vena cava brings the blood from the various parts of the body which is deoxygenated and will pour it into the right atrium. There are two vena cava in our human heart. The upper one is called as the superior vena cava, which collects blood from the upper part of the body and brings it to the right atrium, whereas the lower one is called as the inferior vena cava, which brings the deoxygenated blood from the lower part of the body and brings it to the right atrium. So the superior and inferior vena cava from the upper and lower part of the body respectively brings the deoxygenated blood and pours it into the right atrium. Now what happens is this right atrium will contract and the right ventricle will expand. Due to the contraction of the right atrium and the expansion of the right ventricle, the blood will flow from the right atrium to the right ventricle. And to prevent the backflow of the blood, that is from ventricle back to atrium, there is a valve which is present in between the atrium and ventricle. This valve will prevent the backflow of the blood, and always the blood flow will be unidirectional, that is from the atrium to the ventricle. So now the blood has come into the ventricle. Then again what will happen is this ventricle will contract, due to which the blood will be pushed to the lungs through this arteries. And the artery which carries the blood from the ventricle to the lung are called as pulmonary artery. So this deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle is pushed to the lungs through these arteries, and after it goes to the lungs, it gets purified, and from the lungs oxygenated blood comes and enters the left atrium through the veins, and these are called as the pulmonary veins. So the artery and vein which is associated with the lungs are called as pulmonary artery and pulmonary veins. The pulmonary artery carries the blood from the right ventricle to the lungs, and the pulmonary veins bring the blood from the lungs to the left atrium. Then again the blood which is coming into the left atrium will be pushed to the left ventricle when the left atrium contracts and the left ventricle relaxes. There is again a valve which is present in between left atrium and left ventricle, which prevents the backflow of the blood, and the blood always flows from the left atrium to the left ventricle. Then again this will undergo contractions so that the blood is pushed to the aorta and is passed to the various parts of the body. Aorta is an artery which is the largest artery of our human body, and through this aorta it will go to different arteries and will go to the different body parts. So we have seen how the deoxygenated blood comes from various body parts through the vena cava and is emptied into the right atrium. Then this right atrium contracts, due to which the blood flows into the right ventricle, and then from the right ventricle the blood goes to the lungs. In the lungs, this deoxygenated blood becomes oxygenated and comes back to the left atrium. Then again the left atrium contracts, due to which the blood flows into the left ventricle, and when again the left ventricle contracts, the blood is forced out through the aorta to various body parts. There are valves present both in the right ventricle as well as in the left ventricle, so that when they pump blood to various other parts of the body or various other organs, there is no backflow of blood. Since the ventricles are responsible for pumping the blood out of the heart, the walls of the ventricles are thicker than that of atrium. Since the blood flows twice in our heart, once the deoxygenated blood and then the oxygenated blood, we call the circulation in human beings as double circulation. In double circulation, the deoxygenated blood from the heart goes to the lungs through the pulmonary artery. Then in the lungs, this deoxygenated blood gets converted to oxygenated blood and is given back to heart through the pulmonary vein. And this is the first half of the double circulation, in which there is a circulation of deoxygenated blood to the lungs, and from the lungs oxygenated blood is brought back to heart, and this circulation is called as pulmonary circulation. Then after the oxygenated blood reaches the heart, from the heart the oxygenated blood goes to the various body part through the aorta. Then again from the various body parts, the deoxygenated blood is brought back to the heart through the vena cava. And the second part of the double circulation, which involves the body parts and the heart, is called as the systemic circulation. So therefore, the double circulation comprises of the pulmonary circulation and systemic circulation. In the pulmonary circulation, it involves a flow of blood between the lungs and the heart, and in systemic circulation, there is flow of blood between the heart and the various body parts. So far, we have seen about the pumping organ, that is heart. Now let us discuss about the blood vessels. We know that arteries will carry the blood away from the heart and will bring it to various body parts. Now these arteries will further branch into some tiny blood vessels called as capillaries. Capillaries are tiny blood vessels with very thin walls, and it comes in contact with various cells, so that there is exchange of material between the capillaries and the cells. And then later these capillaries will join to form the veins, and veins will bring the blood back to the heart. The arteries are little different from veins because arteries will be carrying the blood away from the heart, and when heart releases or pumps the blood out, it will be coming out with a huge lot of pressure. So to bear this pressure, arteries are generally thick walled than the veins. Veins do not need to be thick walled because the blood flowing inside the veins will not be in a huge pressure. But to prevent the backflow of the blood, veins will be lined with valves. So if we try to differentiate arteries and veins, arteries will carry the blood away from the heart, whereas veins will carry the blood towards the heart. The next difference can be the walls of arteries are thicker than the veins, and the walls of veins are thinner than the arteries. Coming to the third point, arteries do not have valves, that is, valves are absent, whereas in veins the valves are present. So these are the three major differences between the arteries and the veins. First one is about the direction of flow of blood. The second one is about their walls, arteries thicker than the veins, and the final one is about the valves are present or absent. That was all about blood, heart, and the blood vessels. Now Let us discuss about another fluid in our body, lymph. We know that there are capillaries present in between the arteries and the veins. Through the pores which are present in the wall of these capillaries, some constituents of the blood like plasma, proteins, and blood cells. So these constituents of the blood from the pores of the capillaries will come out and fill all the intercellular spaces present near them. And this forms a fluid called as the lymph. So the origin of lymph is from the blood. But it is different from blood because lymph is colorless, unlike blood because blood is red in color, and lymph has lesser protein than blood. Now this lymph fluid, which is an extracellular fluid, will now drain into the lymphatic capillaries. And then this lymphatic capillaries will further join to form the lymph vessels, which carry the lymph and will open them into the veins. So lymph will be drained into the lymphatic capillaries, which will go to the lymph vessels and finally veins. So all the extracellular fluid is going back to the blood due to this fluid known as lymph. So when we see the function of lymph, the first function can be the extracellular fluid is brought back to blood. The second function, the absorbed fats will be transported through this fluid called as lymph. So lymph is responsible for bringing the extracellular fluid back to blood and as well as transporting the absorbed fats in the body. Now let us quickly recall what we have discussed so far. In this video we started with blood and its constituents. Blood consists of the fluid plasma, then the red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. They have their own functions. Then we discuss about the structure of heart. The upper chambers of heart are called as atrium, and the lower chambers are ventricles. It consists of right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. The right side of the heart deals with the deoxygenated blood, whereas the left side of the heart deals with the oxygenated blood. After learning the structure of heart, we discuss about the double circulation in human beings. The double circulation involves one pulmonary circulation and one systemic circulation. In pulmonary circulation, the flow of blood is in between the heart and the lungs. And in systemic circulation, the flow of blood is in between the heart and the various body parts. Then we discuss about the blood vessels. We saw arteries, veins, and capillaries. The blood vessels which carry the blood away from the heart are called as arteries, and the blood vessels which bring the blood towards the heart are called as veins. And in between arteries and veins there are capillaries, which are tiny blood vessels. After discussing about blood vessels, we learnt about another fluid in our body, that is lymph, which is an extracellular fluid. It is important because it is responsible for bringing the extracellular fluid back to blood and also is responsible for the transportation of fats. So let us quickly discuss few questions from the previous years. The first question is from 2020 for 3 marks. The question asked us to write the correct sequence of steps followed during the journey of oxygen-rich blood from the lungs to various organs of the human body. So they are asking us to trace the path of the oxygenated blood from lungs to heart and then to human body. So let us try to answer this. From the lungs through the pulmonary vein, the oxygenated blood reaches the left atrium of the heart. And then from the left atrium it goes into the left ventricle due to the contraction of left atrium and the relaxation of left ventricle. Then from the left ventricle of the heart it goes on to the various body parts through the aorta. So this is the pathway of the oxygenated blood from the lungs to the various body parts. In between that, heart is also present. The second part of the question asks, tell what happens when the system of blood vessels develop a leak. This question is related to the constituents of blood. Platelets are responsible for causing the blood clot whenever there is a leak in the blood vessels. So we can write about the platelets here, that they are responsible for the blood clot. So whenever there is a leak in our blood vessels, what will happen is these platelets will be responsible for clotting the blood, and this will be stopping the blood leak. So this is all that was in this question. Let us discuss another question for 5 marks from 2018. The first part of the question asks us to answer two components of blood. We can write RBCs, WBCs, or any other components like platelets or plasma. Next part was to trace the movement of oxygenated blood in the body. It's again the same question. You can write from lungs. Pulmonary veins will carry from the lungs to the heart. In the heart, first it will go to the left atrium, then again from the left atrium to the left ventricle, and finally to the body parts through the aorta. Coming to the third part of the question, write the function of valves present in between atria and ventricles. The valves prevent backflow of blood so that the flow of the blood is always unidirectional. That is from the atrium to the ventricles. The last part of the question asked, write one structural difference between the composition of arteries and veins. Arteries have thick walls and no valves, whereas veins have thin walls and valves are present. So with this, we come to the end of this video. In the next video, we will be discussing about the transportation in plants. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this video, please hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.